that came out
Started
on
the
the
meeting
tray.
at
It's real cool.
4:02.
It's fun to watch it. Well worth it.
Can't you back?
Now, if it takes a long time.
I think he was.
Just because. I know. Not spending
Okay.
plastic bottle
We can do
water
that.
is a waste of money.
We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order today of the Salina City Planning Commission.
Yeah, it is.
Did she get the right time?
Girls.
Excellent. The meeting is called to order. Our first item on the agenda is consent approval of the summary minutes of our last meeting on January 5th, 2016.
I move that we approve the minutes of the January 5th, 2016 regular meeting.
Second. Oh, Wally second there.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from January 5th, 2016 meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Excellent. Meetings are approved, or minutes are approved. Item number 3. We have some public hearing items today. 3.1. Dustin, has that been withdrawn?
It has, I believe Mr. Andrew was going to speak to that briefly when he gets here, but it has been withdrawn from the applicant. By the applicant.
Thank you. Should we wait for Mr. Andrews'
There's no
comments?
public, so what are we going to talk about? We've already discussed it 4 times.
And it's been withdrawn.
And it's withdrawn, so why not just accept the withdrawal? Isn't that what we have
Can
to
you
do
speak
anyway?
about it on the next?
Sure.
Beautiful. Let's go on to item number 3.2, which is application number M15-20, filed by the Salina City Commission, which requests a comprehensive review and possible amendment of land use category narratives in the Salina, Kansas Comprehensive Plan. This is an item continued from December 15th. Mr. Andrew, we're on item number 3.2.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, or Mr. Hers explain to you item 3.1?
Where we're waiting for you.
Okay. As to item 3.1, the mechanism or roadmap by which planning staff came up with by which an applicant might be able to apply for a apartment project in a C6 district was to make it a conditional use similar to what it is in the C5, C4, C3 districts. Following the discussion of that item and the companion item relating to land use narratives, the applicant withdrew the application at that time. It had a median income housing grant that had gone into the Kansas Department of Housing at the same time, and I understand that that has been withdrawn as well. And so the impetus for items 3.1, 3.2, and to a limited degree 3.3 are no longer time sensitive at this time. So as it relates to item 3.1, no further action is required. As it relates to item 3.2, since that item was initiated by the City Commission in association with item 3.1, it's our recommendation that no further action be taken on that item. What we will do is following your March 1st meeting where we do our annual review of the comprehensive plan, we will initiate a new application on your behalf to look at all those narratives comprehensively. I did want to summarize on item 3.2 that at the close of discussion, the general consensus or direction of the Planning Commission as it relates to employment land use areas was to direct staff to look at essentially dividing the employment land use category into employment industrial and employment office, and to see if there was something that could be crafted that might allow multifamily housing as a secondary use in employment office areas, but not within employment industrial areas, and to develop appropriate location criteria. Because we were mostly focused on the Liberty Edition, staff did not bring to your attention the fact that there are 6 areas within the city of Salina on the future land use map designated as office employment areas, and those include the ComCare area in the vicinity of Elm and Front Street, the offices at the northwest corner of Oakdale and Iron, the former Bartlett School campus, the Riverdale area, which is along Elmhurst and Westchester to the west of Ohio, between there and the YMCA, the area around StatCare at Republic and Ohio, and the Liberty Edition. Those are all properties that are shown as office employment. So as to item 3.2, there is no need for you to vote or take any action on that item, but it will come back up as a work item to continue work on in 2015, but just not at this time. And when it is brought up, it will be brought up in a comprehensive manner, and it ties back to item 3.4 that we will get to, but Ms. Jackson had suggested at the last meeting that perhaps staff could seek some help from the consultants who helped develop the plan, and we are doing that and have had one conference call with them and have a follow-up conference call scheduled with them to get some assistance from them towards getting better alignment with the ordinance and the plan and techniques for that. So it is our hope that Gould Evans, the consultant who helped us develop the comprehensive plan, can help us on the implementation side.
Excellent.
So with that, I think we'd be ready for item 3.3, if that is the chairman's pleasure.
Does anyone have questions regarding the other items? If not, we'll move to item 3.3, which is application number Z 15-13, filed by the Salina City Planning Commission, requesting amendment of Article 7, Plan Development Districts, to clarify the status of conditional uses in planned commercial districts.
John, do you think you'd be able to put that draft amendment up for us? What we have, this is indirectly related to the first 2 applications and to the whole question of doing conditional uses or conditional use permits in planned commercial districts. But this is a draft text amendment, and as we point out in our report, the City Planning Commission recommended adoption of creation of planned commercial districts back in 1987, and planning staff kind of refers to that as a planned development district light. It has it's not as time sensitive as a planned development district, or as necessarily as complex, but it is primarily designed for strictly commercial development and not necessarily for mixed-use development, where the planned development district is more likely to be used. So in case that you have a sensitive site or a highly visible site, for example, the Quick Shop at Crawford and Centennial, that was done as a planned commercial district as an alternative to a straight C5. And the primary benefit of that from the Planning Commission's perspective is that 2 things. One, a planned commercial district, you can impose conditions on approval relating to landscaping or lighting or drainage or access or those types of things. And then it gives the Planning Commission an opportunity to consider a request to change zoning in the context of a site plan, so that you can, as opposed to giving an applicant a blank slate, you are reviewing a specific plan. So the language that we have from 1987 is basically this first sentence here. It says, uses allowed in a planned commercial district shall be the same as those permitted in the equivalent standard zoning district. The language that we are proposing to add to clarify that is what's in bold there, to clearly articulate and empower the applicant to apply for and the Planning Commission to consider conditional uses. And I'll explain this language right here, I guess, in specific examples. Along South 9th Street on the east side, west side, south of Schilling, we have what is known as the Riffle Addition, is directly south of Schilling Road, and it is a planned commercial district. And then south of the Riffle Addition is known on around Todd Circle is Riffle Addition number 2. And in the case of the Riffle Addition, that is zone Plan C7, and there was a proposal to purchase or acquire a site and develop it for a TSC farm supply store, and that was a conditional use in the Plan C7 district. And so the applicant applied for a conditional use permit pursuant to our conditional use process, and so that was about the 4th or 5th lot that was developed in that subdivision, which is primarily designed for hotels, motels, restaurants, things that serve interstate travelers, and that's why the farm supply store was a conditional and not permitted use. In Riffle Addition number 2, Mr. Riffle learned from his first experience, and he applied for 4 uses that were listed as conditional uses, and he applied for those up front, one of which was hotels. So when that Hilton Garden Inn plan came before you, that use had already been approved as a conditional use. So what we did is we sat down and said, lest there be any questions about that, your 2 options as a developer would be to either have them approved as part of their initial rezoning application, or in any planned district you could come back and apply for a conditional use permit after the fact. The difference being that if you come back after the fact, then there's a full public hearing on whether that use should be allowed, and neighbors are notified. And then this language down here was to make sure that if you had approved at the time of the creation of the planned commercial district certain conditions, that those would apply to or carry over to any approved conditional uses. And so that was basically, so an applicant said, well, that was 3 years ago, it doesn't apply to me now. So we view this as a bit of a housekeeping or cleanup item, but it basically clearly articulates in the code section what the Planning Commission has been doing since 1987, but it more clearly articulates for applicants or developers what their options are for having conditional uses in planned commercial districts. So our recommendation is to recommend approval of the additional language to this section and to forward that on to the City Commission. But with that, I'd be happy to address any questions you have about planned districts or the text amendment language.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Commissioners, are there questions for staff? Mr. Story, do you have a question?
No, obviously, he banged his knee, and I was worried about passing out on
So
the pain.
essentially, if a developer is thinking ahead, they can apply for it up front and as part of the original public hearing. If they don't think ahead, then they still have the option of coming back later and applying.
Just need a motion.
Yeah, if,
It is it's a public hearing, isn't it?
yeah, it's a public hearing.
And I don't see
You
any
should call
members
the
of the public.
out there then.
So I'll assume that there are none, and we'll bring it up here. So if there are questions, we'll have those answered. If not, we'll entertain a motion.
Our recommendation is that you recommend approval of this cleanup language and send it on to the city commission for their consideration.
I'll make a motion that application Z15-13 as presented under item 3.3 in our packet be approved with changes as recommended by staff.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve application number Z1513, requesting amendment of section 42-410D in Article 7 of the Plan Development Districts of the Salina Zoning Ordinance to clarify the status of conditional uses in planned commercial districts. This along with staff suggestions. Or where are
There, as recommended by staff.
they? Along with staff recommendations. We'll take a vote. Okay. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item number 3.4, application number Z15-14, which is also filed by Salina City Planning Commission, requesting an addition of section 42-421 Neighborhood Center Overlay District to Article 7 in the Planning Development Districts of the Salina Zoning Ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we'd like to do is we sat down and kind of, I would call your attention to page 5 and 6 of the report that we sent out to you. And again, along the lines of what Ms. Jackson had suggested is we have had one conference call with Gould Evans to obtain their assistance with implementing neighborhood center concepts into the zoning ordinance as far as implementing this into the comprehensive plan. And so what we mostly want to do today is focus on the concepts and hopefully have a meeting of the minds of what those would include. So along those lines on page 5 there we have basically described in the first part what an overlay district is. We have described for you some of the location criteria and development criteria that are in the comprehensive plan. We identified for you areas that have been identified as future neighborhood centers, including the corner of Schilling and Ohio that we have discussed some, and what you will see in that list is that you have Iron, Ohio, which is predominantly already developed, Holmes and Crawford, which is essentially a blank slate. You have Marymount and Crawford, which is predominantly developed except for one corner. You have Cloud, Ohio, which is almost fully developed. Ninth and Cloud, which is fully developed. Markley and Magnolia, which is an open area, and Schilling in Ohio, where we also have a blank slate. So those are areas that have identified as potential neighborhood centers, and that what we're working with Gould Evans in our conference calls and working together with staff, and we essentially posed the question to them that we have the intersection of Cloud and Ohio. It still has one corner that is not fully developed. And so we visited with Gould Evans and we said, from your perspective, how would the corner of Cloud and Ohio look different than it does today if it were a true neighborhood center? And so that was the focus of our discussions. And some of that gets into the form, but what we discussed with them, and those bullet points are at the bottom of page 5 there, is the basic elements of what would it be addressed in a neighborhood center overlay ordinance. Would be, you'd address the platting or the site layout, the arrangement of lots, blocks, and streets. You would look at building orientation. You would look at building design, materials, and appearance. You would look at off-street parking and loading, and that would have two aspects of it. One, in some communities, they have a reduced parking standard for neighborhood centers to try to encourage different modes of transportation, and then they also focus on the location of that parking. In many cases in a neighborhood center, that is to push the building front and the parking back, addressing what options are for outdoor storage and display, and then addressing anything special as relates to signs. And then part of that is what the site plan review process would be for that, and then the ultimate decision would be, of those areas, what is the effective area of the overlay district. And so presently we have a South 9th Street overlay district, and we had some projects including Marshall Motors, Long MacArthur Ford, and the Hilton Garden Inn that came before the Planning Commission and were reviewed in accordance with that overlay district. We also have a North Ohio overlay district that basically starts at North Street and goes out to I-70. And since adoption of that overlay district, we have had no applications come before the commission to apply the overlay district standards. But if we followed the same process that we would for those other overlay districts, step 1 is developing an outline of the overlay district content, which we have done on page 5 and 6. Then second would be public outreach and education efforts. And last year we had a joint study session with the City Commission and also invited representatives of the development community to that. And we would foresee doing something along those lines to educate the City Commission, Planning Commission members, and the development community about what the neighborhood center concept is and how it's different from existing development patterns. Based on that, we would initiate a zoning text amendment application. We would prepare a draft ordinance with illustrations. We would determine what areas you think of the areas identified that should apply to, and then there would be a public hearing on that draft where we would invite property owners and members of the development community to comment on that. But John, if you could go to the slides that discussed that were attached to their staff report. These are attached in your packet, and what we're basically wanting to do today is just get some feedback from commissioners about whether everybody has in their mind the same thoughts or concept when they hear neighborhood center, and what some of the concepts that we're identifying here. And this is a product of a summer research project that we had a planning intern from Kansas State University come in, and her sole summer project was to work on pulling information together on what would constitute the elements of a neighborhood center. So these are some of the things that our intern identified that would be things that, one of the things we discussed, if you look at Shillington, Ohio, you have 4 different intersections. You have 4 different landowners. You have potentially 4 different development schedules. But still, the overarching goal should be to try to develop some standards that would provide some consistent architecture so that you could have a neighborhood center that might involve multiple owners, but still try to develop with a consistent theme. So these are some of the things that were identified, is that ground floor commercial with residential above, having consistent architecture, parking located behind buildings, articulated crosswalks, meaning that in some cases you would have crosswalks that would extend out and narrow the traffic lanes so that people felt like they had less far to walk, and also calls attention to drivers to the pedestrians. And the other aspect of that is encouraging on-street parking, and that might work on lower traveled side streets. It's probably not ideal on a street like Ohio Street, but that gets to where you look at the orientation and design. And then, John, if you could keep scrolling. As we look at, in many cases, you may have a neighborhood center and it may be abutting a solid single family or two-family area. So we want to make sure that we use landscaping as part of the softscape, and then hardscape refers to things like screening fences or walls. We want to use as much as possible higher quality fencing materials, not have a stockade type approach, not have blank walls or fences, that are 25 feet or longer without breaking them up with plant material. And also, if you've got fences or walls, you may want to consider having pedestrian openings at certain intervals. You can keep going, John. We've had discussions about landscaping and as much as possible trying to incorporate xeriscaping into the landscaping content, but landscaping can improve appearances. They can also provide shade, also provide visual buffers, in some cases sound buffers. One of the things that is noticeably lacking in our commercial developments is what would be referred to as outdoor common spaces, or even small parks and open spaces. We really don't have that incorporated into many of our commercial developments, places where people might want to gather or linger, plazas, courtyards, sidewalk, seating areas, all those things are noticeably lacking. And so this is just an example there of how you might incorporate those into the plan. And so this gets back to where the review of the site plan by the Planning Commission becomes very important, but also incorporating the elements of what you want to see in a neighborhood center up front helps ensure that those get incorporated into any plan. The next element, talking about connectivity and making sure that externally the site is accessible to multi modes of transportation. And so you're looking at internal links. How is that cohesive? So let's say we were looking at the corner of Schilling and Ohio. One of the things that you have were discussing in the case of the proposed Ryan addition was having internal links, where if you're within the subdivision that you have internal links to get from the subdivision to any neighborhood center commercial space. And then the other aspect of that is external links, and that is getting to that center from remote areas. And so I think this is an important criteria, and that was a product from some of the subdivisions in the 70s and 80s, particularly residential subdivisions, or even in some cases because residential areas didn't want to be connected to commercial areas. You could be 100 feet from Sam's Club, but you'd have to get in your car and drive 6 blocks to get around and then pull into the Sam's Club lot because there wasn't a physical way for you to walk to Sam's Club from the north. So those are the kind of things that it's a new way of thinking, where in the past it was to separate off commercial from residential and make sure there was no spillover, and now you're talking about making sure there's linkages between the commercial and the residential. And on the pedestrian side, looking at sidewalks, looking at internal walks, looking at doing things that are at a pedestrian scale, benches, trash receptacles, as we mentioned, common areas or courtyards, looking at lighting, looking at awnings for shade, all those types of things. And then as we look at streets, right now the only place in the city of Salina where you can have angled on-street parking is in the C4 Central Business District. So if we start looking at adding on-street parking to other streets, as we look at platting and as we look at layouts of those types of things, the width of streets, the widths of right-of-way, all those things, it's a new way of looking at platting and street layouts. Our conventional local street profile is 60 feet of right-of-way with 33 feet of street paving within that. And if you start incorporating on-street parking and then sidewalks and things like that, that means one of the things we'll have to look at is, do we have enough wide right-of-way width to accommodate that? You want to look at curb cuts. You want to in some cases you'll have to work around an existing street pattern. So when we look at parking, we're looking at materials of parking. We're looking at the ratio of parking. We're looking at the location of parking. And I think we could all pick any big box location in the city of Salina, and you would probably agree that some of them do have the appearance of buildings located in a sea of parking. And so again, this would be a different, working towards a different form of development. And so we would be looking at the orientation of buildings, how it relates to parking. We'll be looking at sharing parking and coordinated spaces again. I guess an example would be in that's a pretty large fail from the planning staff and planning commission side of things, but because if you go out to where Sam's Club and Target are located side by side, and they were separately owned lots, separately developed. And if you're at Target and you want to go from there to Sam's Club, you have to exit Target's parking lot, get out on the street, pull back into Sam's Club parking lot, and go there. There's not a road that connects. There's not a sidewalk that connects, and that's because the planning staff and planning commission listen to them say, but we're Walmart and we're Target and we're different companies, and we don't want to cooperate. So that would be an example there where you certainly would not want to repeat that type of pattern.
Dean, I have a question. It seems to me like, I may be in favor of these improvements, but it would definitely add to the cost. And would that not inhibit maybe some developments because you're adding 10, 20% to the cost of construction of a new property?
That would be part of the balancing. That would be part of why we're discussing having a joint City Commission, Planning Commission, Development Community study session, because if you incorporate these things, there are one of the things that we discussed was, basically chopping things up more, having more public streets instead of fewer public streets. Well, that's a higher cost to one of the things. If we took the site where Dillon's and their fuel station is located, and you took all of those internal ring roads that they own and maintain and made those public streets with on-street parking and a different orientation, then you're going to have an increase in public costs for building a street to public street standards, financing that, maintaining it, plowing the snow, all those types of things. So there are cost implications to the design implications, and that's part of staff's job, and part of is to identify that. And so Dustin and I attended a planning conference, the four-state conference in Kansas City, and one of the things I took note of was that there were a number of the places that where this sort of orientation was done, and in some cases it resulted, instead of surface parking, it resulted in a plan to do a shared parking garage instead of a lot of surface. And then the developers asked the city for incentives and public investment in the parking structures and TIF financing and a number of other things in order to make up the difference for what they perceived as a costlier development pattern. So you are correct that these may not be all just cost neutral. And so in some places where the concept has been done, there has been some public financing, there has been some incentives and things like that to get to that pattern. So it's not 100% cost neutral.
I'd like to second that thought, to go on with it. Back at the time when we were talking about the rural road that's in front of Vortex and down on Centennial Road, the lack of sidewalks and so on. And I remember thinking, to me, sidewalks there would be an overkill. There are commercial places, they're far apart. People tend to be going to one place, working there and then leaving. Similarly, in town, when you have sidewalks on both sides and, all of what we're talking about here, you're widening all that concrete. And, one of the offshoots that we're not talking about is the ecological issues, one of which is speeding the runoff fast. When we have a torrential downflow, and the more surface that's paved, the more is going to run off very fast, creating, problems too.
That-
I agree. I think, there's a lot to think about here, and the balances is not, or balancing the different issues is not easy.
Right, if you reduced off-street parking, but you had what planners refer to as hardscaped, where you had paved plazas or courtyards, or you had concrete benches, or you had things like that, you're still looking at, you're not necessarily reducing the amount of impervious surface. Or if you take what are today privately maintained driveways and you convert them to streets with on-street parking, you may actually intensify the amount of pavement compared to a different development pattern.
Right.
So one of the things that is characteristic of Salina is that it's very flat, and that we do in the spring particularly have events where we have very brief but very intense rain events, and then that is why you see places like Walmart and Lowe's and places like that have the detention basins built in to hold and detain that. So that is another thing that we would have to look at, that if we end up with a development pattern that generates more runoff, then there may need to be more land set aside for stormwater detention. And so at places like the pond that serves the Coles development out there, that pond was designed to accommodate a 100-year storm, because there's quite a bit of off-site water that goes through there as well. So all of these things are interrelated, and it is certainly not cost neutral. But what we were just wanting to do today is go through some of the concepts anyway, as far as building, parking, those types of things, and just to make you think about that and think about some of the ramifications of those.
Dean, I have and some might find this interesting coming from a person that drives cars with the biggest motors you can buy, but some communities have started to develop paths for golf carts, electric type golf carts, to go from, say, your home to a neighborhood shopping center or to the grocery store and back. Saves using a larger motorized vehicle, saves a lot on parking, and it reduces the cost to some extent. And you find this more, I think, in retirement communities like Sun City and or around Orlando and some of those places. Now, you still can't take them out on major thoroughfares. In other words, you wouldn't be able to take them out on Ohio or Crawford without a license and tag. But is that something we look at in this too? I mean, because you yourself, I think, have told me before that Salina is becoming a bit of an aging community, like many western Kansas communities are. And most of us aren't going to hop on a bicycle to ride down to Dillon's. Maybe we should, but we won't. And to hop in a car to run down to Dillon's doesn't make any sense if you could do it in electric vehicles sometimes. So I just thought I'd mention that. I don't make a commitment. It seems like this is a place that fits in, at least.
But some kind of public transportation that's short route kind of thing might be a solution in the downtown area.
Sure, could be, yeah. Anything, if you didn't have to ride City Go for an hour to get to downtown, so to speak. But I just know that some communities are using golf cart types as a primary means of transportation for in town, and I think it's kind of cool.
This also makes me ask the question with these overlay districts: is the ecological impact of making these kind of changes one of the things that's actually built into the assessment of how to do this? And if not, is that something that should be definitely considered?
Well, one of the things that has to be looked at is whatever we want to call the hardscape footprint, or the what we refer to as the total amount of impervious surface. And so I'm not going to say that these types of developments are necessarily considered to be more green or green friendly from a hardscape, softscape ratio, but the concept behind them is to, one, increase densities so that people are more likely to go by foot from place to place, as opposed to having to get into their car and use their car for every single movement. The other thing is to make them accessible to walking, biking, and mass transportation, so that they have a design that is accommodating to those, and to hopefully reduce fuel consumption and vehicle miles as part of the development pattern. But I cannot say that the end result with these designs is that you end up with less impervious surface and more green space, although that can be part of it.
One question I would ask after that statement, Dean, is would it be fair, because I like to try to go back to sort of the reason that we're even talking about this in the first place. The statements you just gave right there, is that why we're looking at this in the first place? Because we want our community to be more accessible on a neighborhood level, to be walkable, bikeable, so on and so forth. Is that why we're looking at this right now?
Yes. To try to get, I don't think anybody could argue with a straight face that places like the New Dillon store, or going to Lowe's, or going to Target, that the arrangement of those sites, or how they tie in with their surroundings, that anyone could say, well, that feels like it's bicycle or pedestrian friendly. And so the primary difference is when the current design mode, whether you want to call them strip center, big box design, or whatever, the primary driving design factor is to show the motoring public that there is ample parking space to get in and get out of the development. And the idea behind this is to have a pattern, whether you want to call it park once or whatever that might be, that you could park once and take care of multiple things, or even choose not to use a vehicle to access the site. So it is trying to start from day one in looking at the site design, to design it to be multimodal in nature, as opposed to the focus now, which gives the prominent place to automobile parking.
I think it's important to remember that we're talking about design, and that's like the icing on the cake of this. That's what puts it all into prettiness in the picture. But behind that is density. It is a new approach. It is actually a reduction of the use of materials, space, land, as things get tiered on top of each other. And it fosters a system that's collective, where people actually share spaces, where rather than everyone having a front green space, buildings are pushed forward. One green space is identified as a meeting area. One parking area serves 3 places, rather than 3 parking lots in front. So in the communities where I've been involved in this, the result has been a much more user-friendly, functional space that used less resources than the traditional manner of spreading it all out on a long strip.
It occurs to me that one of the examples of what we're talking about would be the plaza in Kansas City. You do go there, you park, and you walk, and it's a large area that you walk.
They fostered that concept a long time ago.
Yes,
We should have picked up
correct.
on that. But there are newer communities,
But,
and I think
yeah.
they're listed right here at the top of this page. Lincoln, Nebraska; Cheyenne, Wyoming; Manhattan, Kansas; Greeley, Colorado. Greeley's a great example, but I've been in a lot in Montana, Whitewater, Montana. There's a lot of communities
There are.
that have
Yeah.
changed the way that traffic and pedestrians intermingle in a community. And I think the overall impact has probably been much more collective and less independent.
And it has had mixed success. I think within there, John, we have the that PowerPoint presentation from Ashley. If we could get into that and go towards the flash through that and go to the very end. Towards the very end, I think we have some information from the city of, maybe just a little higher than that. Wherever we start with the city of Manhattan, see where it starts. Okay, so we can debate all day whether Manhattan succeeded, but one of the things that the city of Manhattan did for the areas north and south of their Manhattan Mall area in the downtown area was what they call the Manhattan Marketplace Planned Unit Development. And the idea was they've taken what we see in a development pattern on South 9th Street that is broken up and not integrated with each other, and they have made some attempts at integration, although at the same time it's difficult to say that it's not oriented at the same time to automobiles. But the one thing that they've tried to incorporate is that this is not a public street, it's essentially a private street, but it goes through here, and they have head-in parking in front of all these businesses except for the Hy-Vee store where they don't have, but they have head-in parking here, head-in parking here, head-in parking all along here. There's a very wide sidewalk along here that connects all these places, so theoretically you can walk all along there without, you can park once and do those things. But the one difference here is that the city of Manhattan owned every square foot of this property, and we're able, as one owner, to sort of master plan it. But the other thing is built in is that there's an apartment building here. There are apartments here on the back side, so it has a mixed use development concept to it. And I'm not saying that this is a neighborhood center, but it incorporates some of the concepts that we were discussing, and it's certainly from a cohesiveness standpoint, it's a little more cohesive, but it does incorporate some of those on-street parking concepts, having housing intermixed with commercial and housing within walking distance of those commercial amenities. If you want to just kind of flash through that, John, that these were, of course, obviously some before and after photos. You know, this gets into more of the design, but you've got wide sidewalks, benches out front, some ornamentation that gets more to the design aspects of that, and you can keep going, John. And then this is the portion that's south of the downtown mall, and you've got the Hilton Garden Inn here, you have a parking garage, you have some on-street parking along here, you have the Flint Hills Discovery Center, and so you can keep going, John, but they have this is what it looks like now. They have incorporated, in the case of the Hilton Garden Inn, they have taken the build to the front approach, where the front entrance of the building is right on the property line or sidewalk, so they push buildings forward and put parking behind or beside. And obviously they paid a lot of attention to the aesthetics or the design elements. So what they had was that they had building guidelines that addressed all those things: building facades, building proportion and scale, materials, roofs, display windows, all those things, and they adopted those and had them in place so that when development occurred, that the Planning Commission was reviewing the proposed development in line with those elements. And you can see some of the things here that we kind of included in our outline. Keep going, John. And so they developed checklists for the applicants and for staff to use in reviewing development proposals. And parking lot to have a minimum of 6% green space. That's actually, and then on-street parking has 100 square feet of green space for every 10 cars. That's to make sure that you have breaks in the on-street parking that have places for islands or things like that. So that is, you have to pay attention to those kind of details to get the end result that you want.
This is Cheyenne.
Okay.
I've walked all around in Manhattan at that development, and it really is pleasant. You know, it's a pleasant place just to take a walk, in addition to being practical.
Yeah, so again, it's hard to sum up in a couple words, but I think if you were trying to say what is the primary distinction is not giving primacy to the vehicular traffic and hopefully developing a pattern where you can park once and make use of the center on foot or be able to get there without having to use a vehicle at all.
You know, one of the things I think, Dean, that we'll want to be careful with future planning is not plan to the past so much, but as you look at what's happening in our society today with internet sales of merchandise and the quick delivery of it by drone in some cases and certainly by mail or delivery in most cases, it's really hurting the box type stores, or it's changing. I should say it's changing the box type stores. And if you look at I think the way younger people purchase today, many of them don't bother to go to a mall or to a store, a box store. They just order it and have it sent, and it's there in 2 days. So if we're looking really at the future, maybe we're focusing a little too much on buildings and a little less on what might be the future as far as purchasing. Somebody mentioned the Plaza, a wonderful place to go to, but I can't imagine they sell anything you can't have delivered to your door in 2 days, probably if you order it off the internet. And so I don't know how places like, well, we know what is happening to malls. We know what apparently is happening to Walmart just recently from the 200 and some stores they're closing. So it's changing. And that's going to change the impact on parking, on green space, and all that if we don't go out to shop. So just thought I'd mention
I
that.
think the emphasis is less on retail in these centers and more on actual residential use combined with entertainment.
I agree.
Yeah.
I have no,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
I have no
that
question. But
Food.
makes
food,
a center
eating out
an
and living.
nexus,
Yeah.
right. Not necessarily a grocery store, but having something to do that's entertainment creates that community.
I certainly agree. And parts of Manhattan's development is that way, but parts of it is tying their retail businesses to the walking area too.
And I struggle for the word, but I think the words are, providing a sense of place. And if you provide a sense of place and you provide things that allow for public gathering spaces or places where people want to linger or want to gather, then you can draw them out of their house and away from their computers and get them out into the space. But if you don't have spaces where people want to gather or linger that are attractive, then they're not going to gather and linger. So that has to be part of it. But I think the classic example that you don't want to replicate is a situation, and I don't think anybody's ever thinking that we're getting a second Target store or another Sam's Club type store, but it's just if you have something like that, but at a smaller scale, that you don't replicate the concept of you drive to a place, you park, there's a place within sight that you want to go to also, but you can't get there, so you have to jump in your car, drive out to the street, and drive in to do that. It gets back to the word connectivity and to have some cohesiveness.
I've seen, the other thing is density in the walking area. We've talked about that, but for instance, as the box store example, Target, and I can't think what city I was in, it was New York maybe or Denver, they had 4 stories. It wasn't vertical. It wasn't horizontal, it was vertical. And everything was delivered down and out the back door, anything heavy that needed to be loaded and so on. But the examples of everything were, upstairs and so on. It worked very well. It was an efficient store and well traveled.
And it's not ideal, but it a perfect comparison, but certainly a place like Aggieville in Manhattan, where a lot of times that is a park once and walk type of place. It has high density. Some people might say congestion, but it has a high density. It has a mix of uses. It doesn't have an abundance of public gathering spaces. It could probably do better, but I think your Country Club Plaza or another one that is considered or attempted to be a modern version is Zona Rosa in Kansas City, Missouri, where they have done narrower streets and have on-street type parking and have changed the arrangements so you can walk from place to place.
I've been real quiet, and I think we're all kind of agreeing that these are the kinds of places that we would like to move at some point. I think one of the impediments that we don't really talk about is that in a lot of the places where this is going on, we have pretty rapid development, and I share your concern about the Target Sam's thing, but I'm not sure. I think one of those buildings was probably built about 5 or 6 years before the other one was, and sometimes it's difficult when you're just doing one business development, spaced over a course of 20 years. It's hard to get the continuity we're talking about. Building materials change in 20 years.
Still is the continuity of planning.
It is.
Yeah,
So
it is.
possible we could sure do better.
And that is what I wanted to make
Yeah.
a statement about, because your statement about Manhattan owning the whole area and being able to do that because they had a blank canvas and the right to do so. This is what concerns me. I love these ideas. They're exactly the kind of grandiose visions that I have for Salina. But my concern is that, again, there's no continuity in how we do this, and are we back to the same situation if we put neighborhood overlays in place and then can't match them with zoning or development or anything else we try to do later, but we had a good idea 10 years ago. In this decision points, I don't know where this came from exactly, but number 5 was, should the downzoning be used as a tool? So my question, or I guess thoughts, are that in order to see any of these things happen, or to have any kind of fruition from anything that we would plan or suggest as a group or as a commission right now, we would have to have the mechanisms in place to see them through, and to have other commissioners in the future be able to fall back on the same policies and ideas to see them through, or we will have a Target and a Walmart situation continually. So how do we get to that point?
Well, what you have to do, and no, we do have those challenges, as Mr. Kennedy pointed out. You have the different changes in market and technology and demographics and all that. But if you just the primary focus, I think, should be if you take an undeveloped corner like Schilling and Ohio, and you ask yourself the question, how would development there look, and how would those corners interrelate with each other, or how would the corners interrelate with the subdivisions they are a part of if we had a set of neighborhood center standards compared to if we do nothing and do the same old, same old. And then you say, well, I would think that if the buildings were pushed forward to the street, and if the buildings were required to be 2-story and have vertical mixed use, or that they incorporate some courtyard or gathering space into their plan, or it doesn't have to be really complex, but it would just see what are those basic elements that would distinguish it from what you see at the northeast corner of Clouden, Ohio.
I agree, but again, I have the question of how we get there. Is Gold Evans going to, for example, supply some kind of drawing as to what that would be for us?
We would have, once it was decided, if you had looked at, these are what we would prefer from a building location standpoint, these are what we'd prefer from a building orientation standpoint, then our goal would be to have illustrations within the ordinance that says this is what we mean in terms of building location, this is what we mean in terms of building orientation, this is what we mean in terms of building materials, and there would be illustrations that would go along with the ordinance itself.
But we'd still need to merge the concepts of zoning, planning, and comprehensive plan.
That's right.
It would be primarily, these are locations where we have or will have what we would call planned commercial zoning that we refer to, where the Planning Commission has to approve site plans for any development that occurs there. And the question is, would you prefer to sit as a commission and say, we would really like you to consider moving the buildings forward and doing this or that, or would you rather be in a position where you say, we have these neighborhood center design standards, and if you expect to have your site plan for this intersection approved, you need to submit a plan that conforms with A, B, C, D, and E design elements. And that
Before I could answer that question in my own mind, we're going to be increasing the cost. Let's just say we increase the cost of a property by 10% just for landscaping. Now, the cost of improvements to a property is going to be based upon the cost of those improvements. Is that not correct? So they're going to be paying taxes on that landscape.
yes, your final taxable value, what you're paying in property tax, is based on the level of improvements that you place on the property.
Could we separate, though, those amenities that, maybe extra wide sidewalks, landscaping, whatever the case may be, could we separate those out from property taxes so we could say to a developer, this, your basic building is you're gonna have to pay taxes on, but these other amenities that we would like to include would be not on the tax rolls?
Well, I'll tell you how the county appraiser goes about doing that. And if you have a subdivision that has areas that has common areas, and those common areas have amenities, whether it's walking trails or things like that, or I just had a conversation with Mr. Mars about his Marymount condominiums, and he, in those condominiums, has a parking garage. He has a number of other amenities there that serve the individuals who buy condominium units there. And what the county appraiser does is they calculate a value of the parking garage or other amenities, and then they distribute that value to the individual units. So if you have, whether it's a courtyard or a private park area or open space or whatever, the county appraiser may impute a value to that, and then it say, well, there's 8 parcels there, there's 8 businesses, so that park has this value, or this courtyard has this value, and I'm going to take 1/8 of that and assign it to this property, and 1/8 and 1/8 and 1/8. That is the general approach that they're going to take. But they're not, if we have landscaping in the right of way, or we have extra wide sidewalks in the right of way, they're not going to associate those values to the private property, because those are public improvements, not private improvements.
Mr. Kennedy, did you have a question when I interrupted you?
Oh, I just wanted to mention, and I think that sometimes the ship's already sailed on some of these types of developments we're talking about. For example, it's difficult to do this, in my opinion, at the corner of Ohio and Cloud. You know, you have a 5-lane arterial street going one way, and you have a 2-lane arterial going. There, walkability there is pretty limited. Same thing on South 9th. But if you look at places like, but I don't know if the incentive is there, you look at places like the corner of Ash and Santa Fe, that's kind of an open slate. I mean, there's not much going on there right now, and that would lend itself to this type of development if there was a reason to get people there, if they would go there. So I think when you look at overlay districts, you got to also look at, is it really feasible or is it not? And Zona Rosa, you mentioned a long time ago. I went there just because you mentioned a planning commission. Zona Rosa is kind of an inner area of town where it doesn't. It's got the interstate goes by there, but it's outside of Zona Rosa a quarter mile or so. And Legends is another example in Kansas City where Legends is internally built away from the interstates and the main thoroughfares, and then you have this walkability is much easier. So I think Ohio and Cloud's going to be a tough one to turn into a neighborhood center.
Well, you have the two different, you have internal walkability, and then you have external walkability, and Zona Rosa it has internal walkability, but it does not have external walkability. And so it's not very pedestrian or bicycle friendly in terms of getting there but once you're there, it's somewhat of a park once destination, but it is, those are two aspects that you have to look at, is external connectivity. And that's the example I gave with Ohio and Schilling, that you could have one of those corners, and the internal connectivity is how easy is it for people in that subdivision to get to the commercial corner, and then the other question is how easy is it from people outside that subdivision from other areas to get there on foot or bicycle or city go. But these are concepts that we're going to work through with, get some additional feedback from Gould Evans. They're giving us some concrete examples of places that have transformed, and going to try to break it down into, if you look at it as puzzle pieces, look at what are the 6 main pieces that constitute a neighborhood center, and then we're going to see if you want to get there. But it is incorporating a lot of the elements that you see in Country Club Plaza, or taking things that we already have in our downtown area. The thing that's different, if you're looking at the corner of Santa Fe and Ash, that's in the C4 Central Business District, which allows 0 setbacks and 100% lot coverage, and doesn't require a developer to construct off-street parking. So when you have those design parameters that you're working with, you can build to the sidewalk. You can have wide sidewalks in the right-of-way. You don't have to worry about constructing a large parking lot because it's either going to be on-street parking or a public lot or a public parking garage. So those are all things that come into play. But I have, in some of the examples I've seen examples where the development community says, sure, we'll do that, but it's going to cost us 15% more than it would be, and do you have some financial incentives you're willing to offer to get us to that point? And that's where you have to start weighing costs and benefits.
Well, that was my original question. That 15%, could that be done through property taxes rather than through a TIF or SAR bond, something like that?
And so what you're seeing in relation to some of the downtown projects is a lot of the streetscape things or the wider sidewalks or improvements to public spaces are not going to be feasible without a TIF or without STAR bonds or things of that nature to help on the public side of things. And so it may be that is the conclusion that is reached, is that it is not financially feasible without incentives or without additional public investment. Because if you build on-street parking, that means the city of Salina is building the parking as part of the street, as opposed to the developer building the parking as part of a private parking lot. And so your public investment increases.
Dean, I'm curious. Has research been done? So the population of Salina has stayed fairly close to what it is for a long period of time. Has research been done, or as part of this particular, even the idea of thinking that this might be a possibility, been done to see the ability of doing something like this to attract more people to this community? So that we could actually say that part of this, but part of the trade-off is, it may cost a little bit more, but you're also opening the community up to bring in more people that find this kind of thing what a city should be like today. Are there statistics, or is there research that has been done to show that that's a possibility?
Well, if you think back to the video that we watched last March with Ed McMahon and the Urban Land Institute, entitled Secrets of Successful Communities, that is one of the things that he argues, is that communities that incorporate, that take those into account and attempt to get public spaces or courtyards or plazas and develop this mode of development pattern are the communities that are growing and are attractive. And you can decide whether it's a chicken or egg thing, that maybe that's the communities that already have a dynamic economy that can do it. But that is the thinking, that if you make places that are distinctive, that provide a sense of place, that makes it more attractive, and more attractive as a place to move to or live. But we are using that primarily as an item to that we will hopefully schedule some sort of study session with, where we will get perspectives from this body, from City Commission, and from representatives of the development community, and we will work with you to schedule and coordinate that. So that is not a action item for the commission, but the next item, which is submittal of your annual report to the City Commission, is an action item. And what we have done is break it down to, this is the document that is forwarded from the Planning Commission to the City Commission. It's kind of your annual report of activities from 2011 2015. And some of the things that we highlighted there was that every year in March, the commission does do an annual review of the comprehensive plan. Also in March, you reviewed the 2015 capital improvement program, and as part of your responsibility to review that to make sure that major projects are proposed are consistent with the comprehensive plan. Last March, we also had a joint study session with the City Commission and with a lot of the development community present, where we watched the secrets of successful communities from Urban Land Institute, and then we had some follow-up discussion. Also, as it relates to the comprehensive plan, you may or may not recall that we adopted a bicycle master plan as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and some of that has been implemented around the community already in terms of bike lanes and sharrows and things of that nature based on that plan. We have produced and we will redistribute for you a guide to mixed-use development that incorporates a lot of these concepts. It's not purely about neighborhood centers, but the whole concept of vertical and horizontal mixed-use development and how you transition from what we have today towards a more mixed-use pattern. And in December, we walked through the narratives, the 11 narratives that we have in the comprehensive plan, and you were able to see that some of the challenges with plan implementation relate to getting alignment between our existing zoning ordinance categories and the 11 land use narratives. As far as study sessions, last year we had study sessions on xeriscaping. We went overview of annexation laws. We did an overview of the neighborhood park plan. We kind of clued you in on the AARP livability index, which they have created for looking at livability of communities and neighborhoods. We had several study sessions where we talked about the role and responsibility of Planning Commission members. Dustin and I attended what was a 4-state conference in Kansas City and came away with a lot of information about a Supreme Court case that affects all communities in the country as far as how they address temporary signs. And then part of your role was review of development applications. And one thing I wanted to point out, there were the comments made about and what we have reported is that if you looked at a graph or chart of residential subdivisions in Salina since the around 1990 or so, it's a feast or famine approach where the Planning Commission may go 2 years or 3 years and not see a residential subdivision plat, and then you'll have a year come where there's a perception of running out of lots, and then you will have multiple subdivision plats. So as we pointed out, the last spike in platting activity was in 2008, and at that time the Planning Commission approved 6 residential subdivision plats that contained 212 lots. And just in 2015, primarily the latter part, we had applications submitted for residential subdivisions that totaled 246 residential lots if you combine the number of lots proposed in each of those plats. So we're seeing a spike in that activity. Part of what we do is just provide information about changes in membership and who's on and who's off, and the dates for terms and things of that nature. So on Exhibit B, we have our record of your attendance. And if you think that we are off base or there weren't possibly that many meetings you could have attended, then let us know, or let Crystal or I know if you think we need to modify that. But that is part of the report to the City Commission. And so Exhibit C is our current membership roster. As we have, it includes people who served in 2015, like Eric Householder, who are no longer on the commission. And then we have on pages 4 and 5 some of the goals. Some of these are staff-driven goals. Some of these are carries over from previous planning commissions. Some of them are recent, but some of the major goals there would be to schedule a joint study session to discuss neighborhood centers. We need to look at the sign code and make sure we are in compliance with the recent Supreme Court decision. We'll get assistance from the city attorney on that. We need to review content for any sort of neighborhood center overlay district that we might be contemplating. We have some zoning text amendments that we think will need to be done to align our narratives with our current zoning categories. We're going to continue to work on parking lot surfacing requirements and have not gotten that off. And then the ones that are related to subdivision regulation that are primarily new. One is to look at amendments to our subdivision regulations to help implement some of the concepts we've talked about in the comprehensive plan, adopting some criteria for reviewing preliminary plats to base decisions on, or to base requiring a developer to modify their plat to include certain things, and then to provide guidance and assist with input on options for financing improvements to streets on the perimeter of subdivisions, which has been a challenging issue for the city of Salina for decades.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew.
This may not be real popular with this committee, but I have a question about where did the recommendation to the City Commission come for adoption of the master plan for renewal of the Old Smoky Hill River Channel? I don't remember discussing that per se at this table, yet it seems to be coming from us. And if we did discuss this, I forgot it. And if I did forget it, forgive me. But I tell you, I'm not supportive of that particular recommendation.
Okay.
Did it come from this committee, or is it something the staff put in?
In March of 2010, the Planning Commission adopted a resolution, and as part of that resolution recommending approval of the plan, they wanted to emphasize that the implementation matrix was fairly extensive, and they wanted to call out from those matrix things that in the Planning Commission's view should, at that time, the master plan was not complete, and what was contemplated was that the master plan would be adopted as a sub-area plan or a part of the comprehensive plan. And the Smoky Hill River Channel master plan was, the plan was accepted, but it was never adopted to say that this is a part of or incorporated in the comprehensive plan. So in 2010, that was there, that the master plan was not complete at that point, so it was an important point of emphasis for the Planning Commission at that time. And then the other thing that the Planning Commission at that time felt was important was the development of a utility master plan both for growth areas and also to support infill and redevelopment initiatives.
But wasn't it also 2010 where the community had an opportunity to vote on the Smoky Hill River Channel and it failed 2-1 for a 1/4-cent sales tax increase? And I see where we're trying to move that forward again at the city level, the 1/4-cent sales tax increase. And this is on here, and I'm just thinking, the community already said they didn't want it in 2010, and we're now trying to force it forward again. And I see this on here again, and I may others, and it may be that the commission is supportive of it, but I just want to personally say I would not support that particular component of this plan going forward to the city commission.
So, again, that was in 2010 when the Planning Commission recommended adoption of the new comprehensive plan and adopted a resolution to that effect. These two items were included in that resolution.
But am I right? Wasn't it 2010 where the community said they did not want to have a 1/4-cent sales tax increase for the purpose of the river channel enhancement?
There was an election, and the increase in revenue to do that did not receive voter approval.
By a margin of 2-1.
Something along those lines.
So I just wanted to bring that up here and have that noted in the minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Are there components included in that came directly from commissioners? We asked that commissioners give their input as far as
What we of the ones that we received, and under long range goals, the things that we received as we discussed prior to our last study session was one of them that was Planning Commission driven was to continue focus on opportunities for gateway entryway enhancements. One of the items that we received from planning commissioners that we incorporated was to assist and provide guidance to the city engineer in reviewing options for financing streets on the perimeter of subdivisions. That would include Holmes Road, but that would include places like Centennial Road next to the Airport Industrial Center and East Crawford, and a number of streets that we have that aren't at urban design standards at this point. So those, and emphasize zoning code enforcement efforts such as, but not limited to, eliminating abandoned signs and mobile signs. That again comes from planning commissioners who said, well, there's only so many resources that can be devoted to zoning code enforcement. What are some that are most important to the commission? And they had previously stated that working on abandoned signs and mobile signs was important to them in terms of zoning code enforcement. This particular group may want to add to that, may want to modify that, but those are things that and as well as the renewal or adoption of the master plan for the old Smoky Hill River Channel and utility master planning were things that came from directly from commissioners and have been incorporated or carried over. Some of the others are what I would call more internal goals that are important, maybe more important to staff than they would be to the commission, but are on there so that we can keep our eye on the ball.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. This is item number 4.1. Are there any other comments or questions about the 2015 annual report? Not. Do we have other matters to come before the commission?
No. All we would do is ask that the commission, either by vote or consensus, authorize us to submit this on your behalf, and we'll be doing this with the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Heritage Commission and Design Review Board. Will all be submitting their board reports to the governing body.
Do we need some kind of motion or consensus on item number 4?
We would like you on item 4.1 just to either by motion or just indicate that you are comfortable with us submitting this report of your activities on your behalf.
What are the
Unless
thoughts
you
of the
wish to have a
commissioners?
separate vote or consensus on the river master plan aspect of that. But again, that was not staff originated, that was originated by the planning commission in their recommendation to the city commission.
Do the commissioners feel that there's a consensus that they would accept this report as satisfactory? I tend to lean on that item. I'm completely with you. So I don't like seeing that as something that I guess I would endorse.
I really reviewed it closely. I would support the plan as presented with the exception of that particular item. I think that needs to be a standalone item, whether it's supported or not. I think it needs to be a standalone item from the commission because a lot of time and things have passed since 2010.
Yeah.
So how we do that,
You are your own planning commission. You're not bound by actions of previous planning commissions, but the origin of that and the purpose for having it in the report was based on previous resolution of the planning commission when the comprehensive plan was adopted, and they wanted to communicate that to the city commission as part of their recommendation. And you are free to leave it in, or you are free to drop it from your report.
Well,
Did the city commission receive this recommendation previously?
Yes, in previous years.
2010, and then again in 11,
They,
and then
in
again
11 and then 12 and then 13.
And the city
And
commission, how did they respond to our recommendation?
The
over that period?
original concept, as was put out and in the scope of the work, was that the consultants who helped prepare the master plan were going to have a joint planning commission, city commission study session, and then the end result was supposed to result in the plan, the renewal plan being incorporated as a sub-part of the comprehensive plan, just like we have the East Salina master plan and a hospital medical sub-area plan. But what ended up occurring was that the master plan was accepted, but it was not incorporated or made part of the comprehensive plan. And that it is completely up to you whether you think that acceptance is good enough and you want to delete that from, because what that would require is it would require having that item come before the planning commission and taking action. Just like we had a bicycle master plan, you would be incorporating that as part of the master plan for the community. And if that's not something that is a goal or a recommendation from the majority of this body, then it should not be included.
It hasn't been discussed since I've been on the commission.
Is the plan the same plan that it was in 2010? Because I know we have different, I don't even know who's developed the plan. And I'm not speaking out of reluctance to see the river develop. That's not where I'm coming from. But 2010 is a long time, and we have had a bond issue vote on that, and we've had different personalities in the Friends of the River and so forth. So is the plan the same? Has it changed since
It is.
2010?
The report is complete, and it has no changes to the elements of it or what it would involve. I think Barb probably knows a little more about the plan than anyone else, but the plan is still the blueprint, and where that comes into play is on decisions like is the new bridge at Greeley Avenue going to be a bridge that you could put trails under, or is it going to be a culvert just like many of our other crossings? And if you're going to base your decisions based on what the river master plan says, then you will build a bridge and you will allow for hike back pass to go underneath the bridge, whereas if you build a culvert, then you don't have no place for hike and bike place. So those are the types of things where the river renewal plan influence community investments and decisions.
But wasn't the original plan for something like $77 million, and which was voted down, and then now the city commission is asking or contemplating an increase in sales tax to improve the river, but not necessarily the original $77 million plan?
Well, the original plan was always very much a phased plan, and it would have to be phased in over time. There's just certain basic elements. I would say that because it is not, it's been essentially, we'll say, inactive for 3 or more years. I don't think people are as familiar with it when we were having all the public meetings and all those types of things. So we would be happy to delete that from your report, and if you would like to have a study session or something about that sometime in 2016, we can arrange for that. But you are not bound by what previous planning commissions have done, and Mr. Kennedy is correct that language in there carries over from a time that preceded the city election on that item. So if that is not a recommendation or priority for the planning commission, then you certainly should not include that in your communication to the city commission.
Ms. Good, do you have comments being involved in that particular arena?
No, I was involved at the beginning, and I was on a environmental technical subcommittee, but I truly have not been involved most recently, so I don't know any current plans. I do think that Dean brought up a good point about if we are looking at areas that are affected along the old river channel, again, as planners, it's like if some form of this master plan does get implemented, if not the however million it was that Dan said, it just seems prudent. Oh, is it not on?
Can you hear it back there?
Oh,
He can't hear it, I'm sorry.
that's all right.
Okay.
No, just it does seem prudent that we would have some guidance to guide us as we make decisions along the Old River Channel. Now, whether, it says adoption of a master plan, maybe it's not. I don't know if your issue is with the plan that was presented. But I don't know. I do think we've encountered things where it's good to have that long-range vision or that plan, so I could see a need for something like that.
I totally agree, but this seems to me like a priority list.
That is correct.
And
if
what
it's not
you're saying, that does not sound like it's on the high priority list.
Although I do know I don't know how we work. I know Friends of the River are moving in a direction, and so I don't know if that's why we're making it a priority. If
Maybe
you've been
right.
the best thing would be some kind of study session where we could invite some people that are actually involved in this project so they could update us on the status of it before I consider it a priority.
Yes, because what you're saying in this is that if you look at the implementation section, it's quite healthy, and you can't do everything at once. And so one of the things that the city commission or planning commission did in 2010 was, well, we want to look at these things and we want to send a message to the city commission of what things we think are important. And so if you don't see that as high on a community priority list, then it certainly should not be included in your report, because it's, what you're saying to the city commission is that adoption should be a priority as a follow-up action, and if you don't think it's a priority, then you should not include it.
Well, I'd like to see it become a separate item to be discussed. It's obvious we don't know what the plan is. It's obviously changed from 2010, or it may not have changed. We don't really know. And we do know that the community did not support it in 2010, so maybe we need to look at that plan again before making any decisions as far as forwarding something. We don't even know what it is to the commission. So I'd make a motion, if you're ready,
I will entertain that.
unless somebody else wants to speak.
I actually would, just
Go
one
ahead. Go
thing I
ahead,
would like to
please.
say, and that is, I'm fine with it being taken off as a something that has to occur right away. However, I don't want the study session to be lost somewhere. It needs to happen fairly quickly so that we can begin to really look at what this plan is.
I agree with that.
I
And
agree
that
with
can
that.
certainly be part of the motion, that we delete it from your report, and that as a recommendation, but that we agree to schedule a study session in the first half of 2016.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion. Kurt did a nice job with it.
Very good. Maybe he would second it.
I would second it.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the 2015 annual report as presented, but to strike. Let me find the report here. I'm sorry.
Item 1 on page 5, under recommendations of City Commission, a master plan for renewal of the Old Smoky Hill River Channel.
Exactly. And to have a study session in the near future to discuss this particular topic and learn more about it so that we can react appropriately. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Any other matters or new business?
We have no matters to bring before you, but we are currently, of the items that we listed, we are currently reviewing. We identified in the annual report 4 residential subdivisions. We've had a 5th residential subdivision filed, and of those 5, 4 of them are scheduled for your consideration within the next 3 meetings. And what we would like to have you do is look at your calendars. We did this last year, and we can do it with enough notice. We've always struggled with quorums and other things when we schedule a regular meeting during USD 305's and other school districts' spring break, which would be the 15th of March. And we would like you to look at your calendars and see if you would be willing to move up the scheduled March 15th meeting to March 8th. And what that would mean is that you would have a planning commission meeting March 1st and one March 8th, but then you wouldn't have one the rest of the month or during the spring break week.
Is there enough that we need both of those meetings a week apart, or could we handle it all with one meeting? I'm just asking.
There is enough that we would meet at both times, and there might be some advantage to you and to others to divide the agendas from the 1st and the 8th.
So the meetings would be March 1st and March 8th and not March 15th.
Yes, if you look at we can decide that at your next meeting, but we will meet on the 2nd, and we do have 8 agenda items for the 2nd. The 16th of February will be a lighter agenda, but the 2nd of February will be a heavy agenda for the commission, and then March 1st. We're still looking to schedule a time. There may be pluses or minuses to reviewing the capital improvement program and doing your annual review of the comprehensive plan at the same time, or there may be advantages to separating those. But those are both review items for you coming up that are independent of applications filed. But most of the applications that we have are related to developers wishing to develop residential subdivisions.
Anything else? If not, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.